Hey, what's happening, YouTubers? We're back with another top 10 list. And today I'm going to talk about my top 10 McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse figures of 2022. And don't worry, they're not all Batman. But I'll be honest, some of the Batman figures that have come out this year are pretty dope. Like this Rebirth one, for example. This is pretty nice, and I would say better than the Mattel one. And don't worry, this isn't a spoiler in my top 10 list, although he's pretty cool. The McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse line has been a very successful one, I would say, over the past few years. And I actually found myself collecting a lot more of these than Marvel Legends this year. I wanted to do top 20, but I scaled it back and just narrowed it down to 10. But before we dive into the top 10 list, y'all know how this works. I gotta do my honorable mentions first, so let's go and get them out of the way.
Before we kick off the top 10, let's take a minute to appreciate a few of my honorable mentions. Let's start with the Endless Winter Aquaman. Well, yes, this is based on his appearance in Endless Winter. The design of his suit is as classic an Aquaman look as you could possibly get. The scaling of the suit is a nice attention to detail. While it does have the side-eye action, I've actually come to appreciate it for this figure because that head sculpt is pretty damn good in my opinion. Next honorable mention I want to give is the Gold Label exclusive Azrael Batman. While in my initial review I would have preferred more additional thorough paint application, I can still appreciate the figure in terms of the sculpting work. The cape sculpt especially is pretty top-notch. And as a side note, this is a sentimental one because my friend Rob D Toys hooked me up with this because he saw them in store and knew I was looking for one. It's one of those cool reminders that make you think that this is what the community is about, helping one another. And the last honorable mention I want to give before we kick off the top 10 list is to the Batman 3 Jokers Batman. I've been harping on this figure all year long, saying how it's the best Batman figure we've got from McFarlane Toys, and to be fair, it is. The only thing is, I took this out of the list just because you've heard me harp on it so long that I think it's only fair to give the top 10 spots to other figures besides this Batman figure, but it's still my favorite one in the line nonetheless. Now it's time to kick off the top 10 list, and coming in at number 10, we have the Carrie Kelly Robin. So, what puts this Robin figure over the other Robin figures we've gotten so far this year? It's simple. This figure looks like it was pulled straight from Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns comic book. The sculpting work combined with the articulation makes this a pretty good figure. A figure of this size with both double jointed elbows and knees is pretty impressive. And the best part? This Robin is the best Robin in McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse line that scales with Batman. It's a body mold I wish they would have utilized more with other Robin figures we've gotten so far. Powering through at number 9, we have the Kyle Rayner Green Lantern Gold Label exclusive. Much like the regular release of Kyle Rayner in the Atrocitus Collect-a-Build wave, this figure kept that same texture sculpt of the suit, but in the classic Kyle Rayner Green Lantern black and green suit. His Constructs accessory pieces are nice, and that head sculpt with the shadowing around the jawline to show his beard is a nice attention to detail in the painting work. Teleporting in at number 8, we have the Martian Manhunter Gold Label exclusive. When McFarlane Toys announced the Martian Manhunter DC Rebirth version, I was on the fence on buying it, and I'm glad I was. I'm glad I waited, seeing as they'd release this classic version. While yes, some might prefer the Rebirth look, but for me, I prefer the classic look. Another important thing I took away from this release, McFarlane Toys can do classic looks. To the naysayers out there that constantly complain about the company not giving us classic looks, here you go. In fact, we've got several other ones since then, but that's besides the point. Coming in at number 7, if you caught my top 5 DC Multiverse figures of 2022 so far video, then you probably remember why this was on the list. And one of the biggest reasons was because we have a comic book General Zod figure. We hadn't seen a General Zod figure in a long time, and the last time we got one was a movie version. It was around the time Mattel was making the Man of Steel figures. Much like I've stated before about this figure, the rubber overlays hide the articulation cuts of the figure, but still providing a nice range of movements. The sculpting work of the cape is top-notch, while it continues to show McFarlane Toys' ability to sculpt these capes in a very unique way that almost gives off a textured soft goods look. While yes, the arms might seem a little bit long, it's still nice to get an additional character added to Superman's Rogue Gallery. Punching through at number 6, we have the Bane Mega Figure. In fact, this is the only Mega Figure on the list. This Bane figure definitely made me forget about the Collect-a-Build Last Night on Earth figure real quick. And I know that figure gets a bad rep, but it's decent. However, it doesn't compare at all to this figure. While articulation is limited on this figure, it doesn't really bother me as much because I don't need Bane to have Spider-Man-like articulation. And also, he's not supposed to. He's a freaking yoked out villain. The sculpting work of the torso and arms are hella detailed, and it's nice to see this figure using hinges at the wrist. The sculpting work of his venom tube on the back and the straps on his torso are a nice addition to the figure as well. Cracking in the top 5 and coming through as a last minute addition, we have the Shazam movie figure based on his upcoming movie Shazam Fury of the Gods. Now, where to begin because I just reviewed this. If you haven't checked it out yet, feel free to check it out. But first, aesthetics. The texturing of the suit is impressive. Compound that with the sculpting work of the gauntlets and boots that make this figure blend so well. Also, an improved head sculpt compared to the Mattel version that released a few years ago. Another big improvement the articulation cuts. McFarlane Toys has improved the aesthetics of the articulation cuts, especially at the elbows and knees. This is for sure one of their best engineered figures in the line so far, and for it being one of their latest ones, I'm hyped to see what the future holds. Running through at number 4, we have the Todd McFarlane designed Wonder Woman Gold Label exclusive. And yes, I know the original version came out in 2021. This Gold Label version came out this year. And speaking of the original one though, it does look nice, but something about the way the color palette looks on this Gold Label version just stands out more. The red and gold colors look more true and like a traditional Wonder Woman. Much like I mentioned in my top 5 of 2022 so far video, I'm a huge fan of this sort of like Valkyrie-inspired design armor. I think Todd knocked it out of the park with his rendition of Wonder Woman. Coming in at number 3, we have the DC Rebirth Deathstroke. While it's our second time in line seeing a Deathstroke figure, first one being the Arkham version, it's nice to have a comic book version, especially since we hadn't seen one in like Mattel's line since the DC UC days, and the DC Collectibles version just looked too bland for me. Whereas this version from McFarlane Toys has the look and the texture that makes it stand out from the rest. Articulation-wise, it moved very well, which is something you'd want from a character like Deathstroke. Compound that with the sculpting work of the wrist joints and ankle joints blending well with the rest of the figure. It's a nice and welcomed addition to the Batman Rogue Gallery. If it had an unmasked head sculpt, it would have easily been my top figure of the year. Clawing her way in at number 2, we have the Arkham City Catwoman, part of the Solomon Grundy Collect-to-Build wave. This figure is amazing. It does have that long legs syndrome that a few of the female figures have in the DC Multiverse line, but in this case it works in my opinion, because it's Catwoman. The head sculpt is freaking fantastic. In addition to that, the articulation also has a nice range, and given that this is Catwoman, you can definitely have her in dynamic poses. While this design is based off her Arkham City version, and it's pretty spot on to the video game I might add, this can very well be substituted for comic book version as well. Breaking through at number 1, we have the Black Adam movie figure. I mean, is this really a surprise to anyone? Again, much like I mentioned in my top 5 of 2022 so far video, this figure is awesome. While the movie didn't change the hierarchy in the box office, it was still a pretty damn good movie to me. And it's the freaking Rock as a comic book character. The fun factor is still kicking for this figure several months later, and even more so especially with that cameo at the after credits. While it seems the DCEU is up in the air, it won't be for your display if you've got the McFarlane Toys Snyder Cut Superman. But back to the most electrifying man of all in entertainment. This figure is so well sculpted and designed, especially that head sculpt. It's probably their best one in terms of live action movie figures. While I would have made the emblem a fraction smaller, it still doesn't take away from the fact that this is a pretty badass figure. I think a huge part of the fun factor for me is the nostalgia trip, because growing up I was a huge wrestling fan, and especially of The Rock. So seeing him in a comic book suit is still pretty surreal.
And there you have it, YouTubers, my top 10 DC Multiverse figures of 2022. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you agree or disagree? Sound off in the comments below and list your top 10 DC Multiverse figures of 2022. And like always, if you like what you see, be sure to hit that like button. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks for watching.